Welcome to the PWTorch Livecast. I am Wade Keller, editor and publisher of the Pro Wrestling Torch newsletter since 1987, and also PWTorch.com, the website, since 1999, and now the PWTorch apps for the past 4.5 years, I think, available on iPhone, iPad, Android devices, Amazon Kindle Fire devices, and Windows phones. And I just upgraded my DVD player to a 2013 Samsung model. On that DVD player is a Samsung Smart TV area, Smart App area, and I downloaded the PWTorch app, and I get to read PWTorch articles on my TV screen now when I'm in the Samsung Smart TV area. Pretty cool. If you've got one of the last 2 years models Samsung Smart TVs or DVD players, you can download the PWTorch app for free from the Samsung App Store. And also, now I host the PWTorch Livecast on Tuesdays and Fridays. The show is on 5 days a week and sometimes 6 because we do special post-pay-per-view shows on Sundays. And I host on Tuesdays and Fridays. Tuesday I hosted with James Caldwell, assistant editor of PWTorch.com. Next Tuesday, Jason Powell of ProWrestling.net will be back with me. But since today is Friday, as has been the case for almost 2 years now, it is Interview Friday. And we have had an amazing wide spectrum of great guests over the past 1.5 to 2 years on Interview Friday. And Bruce Mitchell is joining me today for an interview both of us are looking forward to with one of our, I think, a guest, Bruce, who has a more wide, varied experience in the wrestling industry, spanning so many different territories, so many different eras, and also an author of one of pro wrestling's best books, J.J. Dillon. Bruce, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here, particularly for this interview.
JJ, welcome to the Livecast. Wade Keller here.
Hey, Wade, how are you?
Doing good. Sorry about the logistical problems, but we got in a very nice preview of your being a guest and your career and your participation in the upcoming Mid-Atlantic convention, and talked about the War Horseman days. And Bruce, are you there still?
I'd really like to go crawl under a rock right now. I am so sorry. I apologize so much. I transposed one number wrong and it messed it all up.
And JJ, by the way, Bruce, shut up for a minute. You're on probation.
Bruce has been waiting all these years to play a rib on me, and I think he finally got it. We're okay.
Well, JJ, I want to accentuate this. I told Bruce either on or off air, are you sure you sent him the right code? I know you might have had blurry vision. It's easy to mix up a number. He's like, oh no, I'm looking right at it. We're good.
I'm just so mad. And then I looked at it. I was like, there's that one. Oh, it's up. Now I'm going in for eye surgery right before this Mid-Atlantic Fan Fest.
He's not kidding.
I can say that. I'm not kidding.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you guys because I was about to use this cell phone for a hockey puck. So you guys saved my cell phone.
Yeah.
Well, JJ, as I said, we got a great introduction for you. I appreciate you taking time to join us. We'll just forget about the logistical stuff for a minute, and just thank you for being on. You have worn so many hats in the professional wrestling industry, have been so many places, rubbed shoulders with so many influential top names over the years, and it is difficult to know where to start. Now, I told Bruce he got to ask the first question because he screwed up. I'm gonna change that, and then we'll be done giving Bruce a hard time, or I will be. But I have one question for you. I want you to name the three, and this might be a challenge off the top of your head, but who are the three most interesting human beings that you've dealt with at a high level in an office position over the years? Because you've been with so many people. And I want to exclude wrestlers for a moment because that might even be tougher to such a large scope of people you've worked with. But on an executive level, who are the three most interesting people that you've had a chance to work quite a bit with?
Wow, interesting. I'm just trying to. The word "interesting" is what's. But a lot of interesting. Obviously, working with Vince McMahon was interesting to say the least.
Yeah.
And I can go back to being, in the office, and not actually working in the office, but working with him and Jim Barnett when he was alive.
Yeah.
Very interesting, interesting character. Who the third one would be? All of the years. A guy who I had a lot of respect for, and I'm thrilled to this day when I see him, and he's well up in years, and and manages to come back to CAC as former NWA president Bob Geigel. Very interesting person, and I only met Dory Funk Sr. one time, and it was when I first broke into the business, and Dory was the champion, and there was a Greensboro show, and I want to say it was Dory defending the title, and then there was a tag match with Terry Funk and Dory Sr., and I don't even remember against who. And Terry or Dory had asked me to come down a little bit early and come by their hotel and meet Senior, and they were wanting to talk to me about when I was done in Charlotte, coming to Amarillo. So that was the only time I actually met Dory Funk Senior, and I left Charlotte after my initial run. I was there a little over 2 years. I went to the Canadian Maritimes for the summer, and it was while I was in the Maritimes that I got the call that Senior had this massive heart attack and passed away. So I'm delighted that I at least got to meet him one time. But Bob Geigel, if I could have a vision in my own mind, if I had met Senior after that, spent any time with him, Bob Geigel is what I think Senior probably would have been like, and that's why I think so much about Geigel.
Very good. Bruce, go ahead and ask your first question. Let's keep rolling.
Well, kind of in the same vein, you talked about working in Amarillo for the Funks, and you tell a great story in your book, Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls, from McMahon to McMahon, and I plugged it, and I'm going to plug it again from Crowbar Press. I mean, it's one of the best wrestling books out there. You tell a great story about the sports editor in Amarillo who was not a pro wrestling fan, who was, very critical of the sport and very critical of the validity of it, and how Terry Funk reacted to it. And you and Terry Funk had a match. Can you tell that story? I mean,
actually, it was the sports editor from San Antonio.
San Antonio. Okay, excuse me.
Yeah, and we didn't work San Antonio on a regular basis. It wasn't like one of the weekly towns like Amarillo and El Paso and Odessa and Abilene and Lubbock. And we would go there, I don't remember how often. But anyway, the local sports writer wrote an op-ed column, and basically it was more critical, as I remember, of wrestling fans. In other words, how can you be so stupid or duped, or I don't want to put words in your mouth because I don't have the article right in front of me, but it was very negative in tone about putting down professional wrestling and actually putting down people who would buy a ticket and come see it. And so Terry Funk called him and said, I want to talk to you. The guy got on the phone, and I don't remember his name immediately, but he said, I took exception to your article, and I have a couple of questions. And he wanted to ask me, he said, have you ever actually physically been to a wrestling match? And, well, no. So Terry says, it seemed kind of funny that you could, have such a negative opinion of something that you've never actually seen yourself. So Terry invited him. He said, the next show coming up in San Antonio, he said, I only now want you to come down, but he said, we will make you a special referee for the night, and you can get in the ring for the main event as the referee, and you can't get any closer than that. And the instructions are simple, the rules are simple, and somebody shoulders down, you count three, and there's some basic rules that warrant a disqualification, but it's not that complicated. You could do it. And then after you have accepted my invitation, come down and referee the match, then you can write whatever you want, and I'll live with, with whatever you have to say after you've physically been there and actually been in the ring that close. So the guy took him up on it, and he came down to the next show. The main event was myself and Terry Funk, and Terry Funk, even on a good day, was physically brutal to be in the ring with. He's a very physical guy, and a great champion, a great competitor. And that night, it was, to use the word close, about as close as two guys can get in terms of, there was no conversation in the ring, no joking, nothing. And, and at the beginning, I told the referee, I said, well, these people like him and they don't like me. So I just expect you to call it down the middle, and if you do it that way and don't get swept up with a crowd emotion, I won't have a problem with however you call it, but I didn't expect you to do that. And I think the guy was petrified once he was in the ring with with an arena full of people. But we had the match. I don't remember the outcome. I probably look back in the record book and find that Terry won. But the guy wrote an article immediately following it, and if you talk about somebody going 180 degrees, that's exactly what he did. And he apologized for his previous comments and had nothing but the utmost respect for us after being in the ring and seeing the physical punishment, how hard people hit each other, et cetera, et cetera. True story.
I mean, it's amazing that you could work it that close and that you could work together, but at the same time, take someone who was that critical and who was obviously was going to be looking for holes and looking for things that didn't make sense and turn them around and convince them. Particularly in that era, lots of sports editors were not fans of professional wrestling. Were not fans of what they thought they saw. So I wanted to ask you, you're in the WWE Hall of Fame with the Four Horsemen, and you do work for their Legends Roundtable, and you part of their Legends deal. When you were up there a year or so ago for that Hall of Fame ceremony and just being around WWE again, are there modern stars that are respectful of what you've accomplished, or who stands out that has a sense of the history of the business that is working there now?
Well, I find all of them respectful to start with, which I'm thrilled that even the guys just starting out are all respectful. I guess that's the key word. The guys that are probably more so are the guys that have been there, been around the business for a while, and guys that I can't think of anybody that was there that I actually wrestled, but I'm talking about Triple H, I'm talking about Undertaker, I'm talking about Shawn Michaels. These were all guys who have a history in the business and have demonstrated over the years, a level of respect for the people that paved the way for them. And of the current group, the one guy who was stood out as being particularly respectful was CM Punk. Just over the top polite, and I actually after that went to I had a college reunion in Reading, Pennsylvania, and my fraternity had a banquet that night, and as it worked out, the WWE was in town, and Arn Anderson was the lead agent on the show, so I left the dinner early to go down to the arena, and CM Punk was there, and it was my first opportunity to see Paul Heyman, too. I hadn't seen Paul in years, and Arn knew I was coming, and the show had already started. I get in the back door, and I think it surprised a lot of other people. Paul Heyman was, beside himself, and I have a lot of respect for him because just when everybody thought that the idea of a manager in wrestling was a dead issue in the modern era, along comes a Brock Lesnar, and now it's the right scenario, and Paul Heyman stepped into those shoes and has done an outstanding job. But CM Punk came up to me and he said, would you be willing to please take a picture with him and I with Paul? And I said, absolutely, of course. And it was just that kind of show of respect. And I stayed. They had a monitor back there. I didn't go out in front of the crowd. And I watched on the monitor the various matches. And I did leave as the main event was in the ring so that I could meet the crowd. And I was spending the night. But CM was in the main event, and right before he went on, he came over, shook my hand, and said that he appreciated my spending time backstage and watching the monitor and watching the matches and demonstrating to the current guys that the so-called legends still had an interest in the business and a passion for it, and and wanted to stay and watch. I was very, very impressed by CM Punk.
In kind of the same vein, I don't know if you know this, or you got a chance to see Monday night's show, but they introduced the Wyatt family, and of course the head of the Wyatt family is Wyndham Rotunda, who whose father you worked with and whose grandfather you worked with, and they did a series of vignettes before they introduced the Wyatt family of a reporter from WWE.com going out into the woods, into the backwoods where the Wyatt family was, and I was watching it going, I've seen this before. And I think you know where I'm going with this. I mean, I was just... And the fact that it was
Dusty and Blackjack on horseback and me in a limo.
Absolutely. The saga of the family. It was very reminiscent, except for a reporter. You were the manager of Ron Bass, the traitor to the family. And if you could tell that story of the vignettes, it was, and what Eddie Graham's reaction to, who was the owner promoter in Florida, who you were working for at the time, when you proposed this television miniseries on Florida Championship Wrestling. If you could talk about that.
Yeah, Dusty, I worked with Dusty many, many years, and Dusty, I think, gets a bad rap a lot of times for his booking style and what he's contributed. Dusty is a brilliant guy. He's brilliant as a character, as the American Dream. He's brilliant as someone who understands the business and great creative skills. In Florida, when you're producing 1 hour of television a week, Eddie realized the value of that program that went to all of the towns eventually, and was very, just by the fact that the credibility of a Jack Briscoe and how a Gordon Soley called the match, and when the idea came up of, again, as a heel, anybody could go on there and just say bad things, and after a while, no matter how creative you get to be, it gets to be repetitive. So I took pride in the fact that I would always try to think of different approaches to eventually accomplish the same thing, but to do it in a fresh way. And that's what the saga of was, which I think Dusty brought one of the saddles in, and it actually was a takeoff of an old Cowboy series where the old Ranger would talk about the old days, and I mean, there's nothing original in wrestling, and that's really what that came from, where, sitting kind of by the fireside and talking about something. So I got some books from the library and just fabricated this story of looking at some of these old Western guys and basically saying that Dusty and Blackjack Mulligan were reincarnations of these dastardly, miserable outlaws that lived 100 years ago and were no better than they were. And I don't think Eddie was all that supportive. We had theme music to open it, and I think Eddie, I understand, because I had so much respect for him, he did have the greatest impact of anybody, but he let us go on with it. And it was taking up TV time with just talk, and the segments didn't go long, as I remember, but they certainly were different. And I have more people, after all of these years, that'll come up and comment to me that remember those segments. So obviously they had an impact.
I really don't know whether it was a coincidence or not, but I mean, I thought there was a real, there's nothing new in wrestling, but I thought there was a real parallel, and it was pretty cool to see that, 30 years ago, J.J. Dillon got chased out of the family and shot at and ran out into the woods, and pretty much the same thing happened on Monday Night Raw for Bray Wyatt.
Just like the ambush where we beat up Dusty, it was a one-camera shoot. And a guy in the back seat of the limo, and then he'd get out, and I'm all dressed up in the limo and being my arrogant self, and here comes Dusty and Blackjack riding up on horseback, and Blackjack pulls out the gun and cocks it, and what are you doing here? A couple shots in the air, and all. I mean, it was like a Three Stooges type thing. I jump up and down like I'm running for my life, and then of course the next thing you see is cut to the studio where I'm filthy, dirty, what have you, and then I've got this poor sympathetic story about how I, was unjustly treated, ran for my life. Well, I guess it's a funny line. It was a funny line then, it's still funny now. I said I was, viciously attacked by armadillos, that if you come up upon an armadillo, all they do is roll up and fall and play dead. But it was cutting-edge, entertaining television that, as I look back, I think really was ahead of its time.
We've definitely seen that idea of the movie coming into pro wrestling, and I just thought, wow. I mean, here we're watching Blackjack Mulligan's grandson.
Yes.
The nephew of Barry Windham doing that. So, in that same way, getting a promotion from there. Yeah. Well, talk about the Four Horsemen for a minute. What is it about the Four Horsemen where that concept, where that a manager with a group of wrestlers? I mean, you had that in Texas, you had that in Florida and in Memphis and in Georgia, but what is it about the four? And so did many other managers. So what is it about the Four Horsemen that it seems to have lived on? A couple of years ago when you guys did the reunion in Charlotte at the Fan Fest, the overwhelming reaction to it, and getting into the Hall of Fame. What is it about the Four Horsemen that has that life to it that continues?
I to this day really can't explain it to you other than I was involved in creative right from the very beginning of my career, because when I broke into the business, I was, as a full-time wrestler, months to my 29th birthday. And I'd been a referee for 8 years, part-time. So I wasn't a kid. And my approach on the business was different than an 18-year-old kid that's a great athlete that's now, breaking into the business. So I knew that if I was going to have any longevity, that I had to look at all aspects of the business, and took a keen interest in the creative side, television production, matchmaking right from the get-go. And it's interesting that creative people can sit down and just, discuss ideas, discuss characters, which more the era of Vince McMahon did it become a discussion of characters and then refining them. And what you find out is that sometimes those ideas that you think, boy, this is going to be a Grand Slam home run, this is beautiful, and for whatever the reason, the fans just look the other way and have absolutely no interest in it. And something that you just kind of go with because that person's there to give them something to do catches on fire and all of a sudden is the hottest thing going. Can I explain why? No. But that's one of the beauties of the wrestling industry is that, you're challenged to constantly keep thinking of things, and the ultimate judge and jury are the wrestling fans. They either like it or they don't. They're either going to buy tickets to see it or they aren't. And with the Horsemen, it wasn't something that was a creative plan. It was a spontaneous thing. We were doing TV, 2 hours of television in addition to syndicated television for Crockett, for TBS to do that 6:05 show. We would often roll in from having been somewhere the night before and flying on a charter that morning to get there in time to record the show, and then have to get back to the airport to fly somewhere to work another arena event that night. And we were not always in the best of shape, and that being said, probably not our sharpest mentally and physically and whatever, but it was a time where we loved what we were doing. The group of guys, there was a chemistry there that it's either there or it's not. And we held all the titles and went out basically just to do an interview, not to say fill time, but, hey, you guys got all the championship belts. Why don't you just all go out there? That way you can plug where you're going to be the following week. And I was only managing Tully at the time, so I went out. I was the only manager out there. And, Arn made the comment about take a good look at the picture, with all these guys holding all the championship belts, and said never have so few wreak so much havoc on everybody else. You'd have to go back in history to the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and held up 4 fingers. And that's how it started. And every time and in the studio in Atlanta, there was a lot of times where Cub Scout troops and these weren't older, mature fans. And every time we would go to an arena, we would look out, and here's people yelling, horsemen holding up four fingers. It became an interactive thing, and it just grew and grew and grew. And it was a couple weeks before Jimmy Crockett came back and says, what's this four horsemen thing I keep hearing about? It. Jimmy, I don't know, you better pay some attention to it because it's something that the fans have picked up on. They like it. And as I said in my comments at the Hall of Fame, there was no way in the beginning that we ever could have anticipated how big it would become and how long it would last.
It's amazing. It is an amazing thing that all these years later, like that still is one of the preeminent groups of bad guys, and we see to this day in the Shield and the Aces and Eights, and as the years go by, they're recreations and variations and all kinds of things.
And part of the key was that everybody was already established in the business, so it wasn't like guys trying to, make their mark in the business. Everybody was at the top of their game already. And what was nice too, you had no clash of egos. You had, nobody out there. If there was an interview and somebody didn't get to say something, when you came back, there wasn't a situation where that guy's pouting. It was just whatever it took for the moment, knowing where we were going or what the next pay-per-view was or the next match coming up. And it was a group of guys who were together. I mean, we were away from our families. We were on the road together. We traveled together. It's not like we went separate cars and planes. And we would be in the locker room together, and then when it was over, Flair would have already announced where we were going to be that night. And, we off the time would say, well, I think we'll crash tonight. And we get back to the hotel and race to, get the wet stuff out of our bags and head for wherever we were going, and just one day ran into the next. And as I think back, how I was able, speaking for me personally, to keep that pace to this day, I don't know, and it's a miracle that I didn't kill all of my brain cells and could still carry on a reasonably, legible conversation with you.
Let me jump in. If you're just joining us, this is the PWTorch Livecast. I'm Wade Keller, joined by co-host Bruce Mitchell, senior columnist for Pro Wrestling Torch newsletter and PWTorch.com. You can read Bruce and me and other Torch staff members answer questions in the Ask PWTorch feature every midday at PWTorch.com. It is a website exclusive, and there's a VIP exclusive question I answer every day exclusively posted on the VIP website for VIP members. We are joined by J.J. Dillon, who has worn many hats in the wrestling industry. JJ, one of the roles that you had was working behind the scenes in WCW in its final stretch of existence. And I think it's such a fascinating time, such a massively industry direction-changing time. When you look back at the final couple of years of WCW, do you have something that you pinpoint, having been in the trenches and behind the scenes, as the number one reason, or are there 2, 3, 4 reasons that collectively led to what was this successful juggernaut that brought Vince McMahon to his knees, being out of business and sold for scraps, not really that many years later?
It was a painful way for me to have ended my career after all of those years. And I, if you go to my website, jjdillon.com, and you can see where my book is available, because it's not in bookstores, and it's documented there. I devote a whole chapter at great length to the time that I worked for Vince, and then the circumstances under which I resigned and ended up going to work for WCW, thinking that would be my last stop in the business, because there were only 2 major players at that point, and I had left Vince, and there aren't many people that do that. And so I kind of eliminated that as a possibility to go back there. And I didn't know what to expect, because I had actually left there within a month to 6 weeks after the company was formed when they bought out Crockett. And so now it's 89 to 96. You're talking about 7.5+ years later. I come back, and I didn't really follow the other product. I always put almost 100% of my attention to whatever I was involved in at that time, not worrying so much what another promotional company might be doing. And I'd never met Eric Bischoff. Didn't know if they would hire me. And as I look back, because I had such a high profile in the business, probably Bischoff would have had a hard time explaining to the higher-ups why he didn't hire me, given my background. But anyway, when I met Bischoff, all he talked about was putting Vince McMahon out of business and how much longer can he hang on. And I'm expecting him, I'm not talking about, asking for specific proprietary information that would have been inappropriate for me to discuss, but just general philosophies and how things are done. And he didn't ask any questions. He wanted to do all the talking. And so my impression was, one, immediately, that here's a guy who, boy, they think he's the answer to the future of the business, and this guy knows absolutely nothing. And then I heard the stories that, that he used to get coffee for Vern Gagne, and that's what he sold himself, which he's very good at, to the higher-ups, because there have been a lot of people who stepped in to run the company and then failed. So here's a guy who's enjoying some success, and I think he had a separate agenda right from day one. He had no passion for the wrestling business and was looking at Hollywood and other things. But as I think back, Eric Bischoff could have looked at me as a resource that he could have tapped into to help him take his company to a higher level. Or the other way to look at it would be, here's someone who spent a lifetime in the business that is going to know pretty quickly how little I know, and exposing. And I think it was more the latter. So my relationship with Eric was not on solid ground right from the get-go. And I just saw things happening that were very sad to watch. Even I didn't think that, 5 years later, that it would get so bad that they would pull the plug, because actually, what happened was the uppers looking over Eric Bischoff's shoulder had no knowledge of wrestling. It's a simplistic industry, and yet it's an industry that you have to know what you're doing to run it profitably as a business. So there was no one with that experience. They could look over Eric's shoulder. I mean, they would look and see ratings, and they were a broadcast company, so their whole focus was on ratings and nothing else. And they thought, more eyeballs, then it's going to eventually translate into more revenue, and we're going to enjoy great success. And Vince was the third generation that had a much bigger picture. He knew that he had to keep his talent costs in line. When you look at wrestling as a promotion, your production costs you have some control over. But when you run live events, your rent is what your rent is. It doesn't fluctuate much. Your insurance, your advertising, et cetera, et cetera. Your one variable is your talent. When business is good, talent are accustomed to making more money and being rewarded better than if the house wasn't as good last time. And so they accept the ups and the downs. And Eric got himself backed into a corner where he had these big bloated guaranteed contracts that when they went out of business, their talent costs were in excess of 60% of what their revenue was. And to be successful and profitable as a company, your revenue costs for your talent have got to be somewhere in close to 25%. So 25 to 60 is, and when it's guaranteed and things slow down, now you're in real trouble. So it was really painful, and I blame a couple of things. I blame Brad Siegel, who was the fair-haired guy who was the head of TBS and head of TNT, and going out to Hollywood and making all those made-for-network movies, and very high in esteem of the eyes of Ted Turner, and he thought he could just step in, take over the company, and do successfully what nobody else had been able to do. and Eric Bischoff was the kind of guy who could sell himself to him. So I blame Brad Siegel, because when you're paid money at that level, you should be able to realize what's going on or seek out people who do know what's going on. And he allowed Eric Bischoff, removed him one time, then allowed him back to power, and then all of a sudden, when you're making money and all of a sudden losing $5 million a month, and they were looking at projected losses of $60 million for the 1 year. Actually, it was $80 million at one point, and then they said cut. Well, they cut where they could, but it was people at lower levels and the big fat guaranteed contracts. In the end, they were looking at $60 million in losses, with another projected $60 million the following year. And AOL Time Warner said, "Hey, this is just another division. We're not in the wrestling business," and pulled the plug. So it was very painful. And I kind of liken myself to being on the Titanic and standing in front of the radar and looking down and seeing that iceberg up ahead, and knowing that unless they slow down or divert direction, that it's a calamity waiting to happen, and say, "Hey, come here, look at this," and nobody paying any attention. That's what it felt like, and it was sad, because there was probably 70 guys that were making a full-time living that all of a sudden were out of business. I think it would have helped Vince if they stayed in business, because it would have been a pool of talent that he could eventually draw from. And I feel sorry for Ted Turner, who really had a genuine passion for wrestling, and at the end he had a fancy title after all of the AOL and Time Warner and others came in the mergers, but he didn't have the personal power to mandate that nobody touch wrestling. So it was a sad day when it was all over. And like you said, Vince bought it for peanuts, and the only thing of real value was not loaded talent contracts, but all that video library that he's putting to great use.
I got a couple quick follow-ups, and then I want to take at least a phone call or two, and then, Bruce, you can chime back in and lead the interview in the direction you want to go at that point. Also, J.J. Dillon is our guest, and if you want to call right now, the number is 646-721-9828, 646-721-9828. We'll go to 336 first. But first, J.J., just a couple quick follow-ups to what I asked about WCW. So ultimately, do you think the blame for WCW going under were the guaranteed contracts? And if not, or if so, what else is in the mix? I always thought that myself that one of the defining moments paired up for WCW, and Eric Bischoff agrees with this, was Nitro expanding to 3 hours and Thunder being added. Could you talk about how WCW was seen as a TV revenue rating generator, and the assumption was if ratings are good, everything else will fall into place. But it didn't take into account that when you spread out the creative forces, when you overexpose the talent, any show ends up having a diminishing effect in the long run. That's one of the fears we have about a 3-hour Raw with main event and SmackDown later in the week also, that WWE, even if they have short-term revenue benefits, will have long-term ramifications in terms of overexposure and watering down creative. So was that a big factor? Did you see that happening when Nitro expanded 3 hours and then Thunder's added to the mix? Did you see that happening, that, wow, we were pretty good at a 2-hour show, and we're able to juggle our weaknesses, kind of hide our weaknesses, mask them, put Band-Aids on when they're, put fires out when needed, correct course when needed. But once it got to 3 hours plus 2 hours of Thunder, the infrastructure and the talent just wasn't there. Is that a fair hypothesis?
Yeah, that is very valid. And I have genuine concerns in the current environment too, because there is a lot of television being produced with probably a smaller talent pool than ever in the history of the business in terms of qualified people, which is why you see when you come on, it's not unusual to have some kind of an exchange that happens verbally back and forth with virtually no action for upwards of a half an hour into a show. And I can see that it's happening by necessity, because with the amount of programming that they're having to fill, that's what they have to do. They don't have an experienced talent to give longer matches. And then the other dilemma that they're in is they are also in the pay-per-view business, so they have to protect certain matches to save them for pay-per-view, to make them be worthy of somebody paying extra to see that. And also in the modern era, they're being paid, rights fees that also didn't exist years and years ago too. But it was of great concern. The other big thing that Vince got the heads up on was Vince pioneered licensing and merchandising, and he was light years ahead. And the guys used to get big fat checks, and they would get a printout quarterly from a computer sheet that looked like a small phone book. And Eric Bischoff didn't have anything like that, and tried to get it started, but starting from scratch. And that's why when a Kevin Nash or a Scott Hall came in that were accustomed to getting huge checks for licensing and merchandising, now go back to Eric Bischoff and say, well, we got a contract, but this is what we're accustomed to getting, and that aspect of our compensation at the end of the year is non-existent here, so you've got to make it up somewhere else. And they ended up playing him like a fiddle. And I mean, I could tell you horror stories where Eric would, go down to the bar and after the TV and start drinking, and that's not a great idea, because he would get hammered and guys would wait, and then they'd pull him off to the side, and he would agree to things that the next morning had no idea what he had promised. And I would get the phone calls, and I would call Eric, and Eric say, well, I don't exactly remember what call them back and see what they said, I said, kind of thing. And then the guys would get, rental cars paid for and first-class air transportation. And meanwhile, Eric, was just obsessed with trying to put Vince out of business, so that the production costs of doing a live TV every week just went through the roof. And meanwhile, Vince, I'm sure, had some sleepless nights, but even though he was losing a ratings war, he was still doing healthy business and live events, and he was still being profitable in pay-per-view. And he basically gave Eric Bischoff enough rope where Eric Bischoff hung himself, and Brad Siegel let him do it. And, and Vince Russo was given a free rein, again, without having a Vince McMahon over his shoulder to, temper some of the things that he wanted to do. It just was a formula for disaster right from the moment that I got there.
Well, it seems with Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara coming in that they had a mentality that was ratings. What can we do this week to compete with Raw? What can we do this week to prove that it was us who were the talent that made Raw successful, and we were underutilized? And that was where Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara's focus was. And Vince McMahon, and it wasn't that Russo and Ferrara didn't have a skill set and didn't contribute and weren't valuable, and maybe WWE wouldn't have had the hot run they had without them. That's a debate and a discussion that is worthy of having, and people will agree or disagree, in that debate. But what I don't think Russo and Ferrara fully understood is how much their talents were dependent upon the context of the WWE machinery and Vince McMahon's editing. And editing is a very generic term.
He filtered what they did, and Vince is very skilled at taking people and getting the maximum out of them and knowing when to say yes and when to say no.
And also Vince kept an eye.
When I got to WCW, that was totally absent.
And Vince kept an eye, JJ, on, okay, we need ratings, but we got to hold back this, and this. And while we're drawing ratings this week and next week for Raw, we are also, there's this undercurrent that isn't on that fans don't obviously see, but there's an undercurrent of things that we're saving and building to that will help us also succeed at house shows and on pay-per-view. And I think your frustration, from talking to people in WCW at the time, you and the camp of people that you kind of were with and were watching from a short distance what Russo and Ferrara were doing, is they were clueless about that Vince McMahon had that aspect to his booking, that he wasn't just going for the minute-by-minute, quarter-hour this week's ratings. His eye was always on revenue, on pay-per-view and house shows, and having that undercurrent. Was that one of the reasons that the faction that you were kind of with behind the scenes pushed so quickly? Because obviously Russo and Ferrara say, you didn't give us a chance. But you guys, I think, saw we're in trouble. We're losing money. We need buy rates. We need revenue to stay in business. We got to pull the plug on this quickly before more damage is done.
Yeah, and I think another factor that never comes up in the discussion is the fact that there were people who publicly said that the success that Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara enjoyed at what was then the WWF was in large because of the filtering of this. And I think, though they never admitted it, never was openly discussed, I think maybe they may have resented the fact that they didn't get the credit that maybe they felt they were due. And the reality of it in the company even today with the WWE is Vince takes credit for everything that's good and never takes the heat for anything that's not good. And that's part of the job in talent relations. It's kind of like the press secretary for the president. Your job is to catch the hand grenades.
And I will say, JJ, Vince Russo did say that in the Torch Talk that I did with him right after he left the WWF and right before he joined WCW in that short pocket of time. He said what irked him, to put it lightly, was watching all the mainstream media attention WWF was getting at the time. And that Shane McMahon and Vince McMahon and Stephanie McMahon were sitting around taking credit for this Monday Night War period. And here Vince Russo and Ed Ferraro were, and this is where I totally have sympathy for them. They're sitting around in the trenches, writing these shows, working with Vince McMahon on these shows, meeting with him multiple times a week, on the phone, in person, and would absolutely be considered head writers for any other major hit series on any other genre. And they don't even get a credit when on the end of the show or in any kind of official capacity, nor on interviews. And I think they're sitting there going, my God, we feel so slighted that we're doing this. We're Vince McMahon. It's me and Ed and Vince McMahon, and then Vince goes out parading around with his family, taking credit, never mentioning us. I understand that they felt slighted.
It's like today, if you ask, they call it the WWE Universe. If you ask anybody in the WWE Universe who Kevin Dunn is, what do you think the percentage is of people that could tell you who he even is?
Yeah.
Or would recognize the name?
Yeah.
It's the nature of the business. You have a job to do, and you're paid well for it.
Yeah.
And if you're bothered by the fact that you don't get credit, I mean, and again, you know, at the close of the WCW shows and the Crockett shows, as you say, executive producer Virgil R. Rawls, and so, you know, I can understand the want for credit, but it's something that you it was a mistake to be obsessed with it, and I really believe that was part of the problem in WCW, that they felt maybe a chip on their shoulder because they didn't get the proper credit, felt they were in a large way responsible for the success, and so now we're going to prove it because, you know, we're going to set this place on fire, and we have to get our due credit.
Yes, absolutely. I want you to name one thing that, and this will be my final question, and we'll go to call and then go back to Bruce. Name one or two things that Eric Bischoff did well, because I think objectively speaking, there has to be some credit historically to Eric Bischoff's role in getting WCW to the heights that it went to, even if it took a very special set of circumstances and a lot of money to make it happen.
Eric Bischoff is as good a salesman as I have ever seen or been around. He carried himself well, you know, dressed well. He was able to comfortably go down to the CNN towers and meet with the hierarchy right on up to a Ted Turner or whatever, and sit there and exude confidence. And he would have Bill Bush with him, who was a numbers guy and knew, you know, what the truth was. But Bischoff would go in there with a story, tell the story, and Bill Bush would just sit there and nod, and there was no one with any knowledge on the other side to challenge any statement that Eric Bischoff made. So he's very confident, can be very arrogant, and there's nobody better at selling themselves than he is. But you can only sell the sizzle for so long, and then it comes time to put the steak on the plate and serve it, and that's when you got in trouble.
Yeah. Very good. Let's go to the phone lines. If you're just joining us, J.J. Dillon is the guest here on Interview Friday on the PWTorch Livecast. Next Friday, $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase Sr. will be joining us, and we hope you will join us for that show also. Also, following Money in the Bank on Sunday night, a half hour after the show ends, come to PWTorchLivecast.com, right here, PWTorchLivecast.com, to listen live to the post-WWE pay-per-view show. As promised, we'll start with 336, and then we'll go to 240, and then we'll go back to Bruce Mitchell. 336, please state your name and where you're from.
Yes, sir. My name's Rick from North Carolina.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I was just wondering JJ's opinion on the recent Four Horsemen going into WWE's Hall of Fame, and to speak more specifically on Ole Anderson not being a part of the Hall of Fame, but Barry Windham being chosen to be part of that. Just JJ's personal opinion on Ole Anderson being left out of that.
Now, JJ, before you answer, a little sidebar. Rick said he's from North Carolina. Bruce, you're from North Carolina. Based on the accent, can you tell me what part of North Carolina Rick is likely from? And then we'll we'll have Rick tell us.
I think he's likely from the Triad, from Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and High Point. Now, I'm listening to the accent very carefully, but I'm also listening to the area code.
Oh, that's a giveaway. Shoot. All right, Rick, where are you from?
Yes, sir. It's Burlington, North Carolina, and he did use the area code against you. Absolutely.
Uh-huh. And that's where you've always been from?
Burlington is right next door. Burlington is like right next door to Greensboro. So.
All right, shoot. I thought I might get you, Bruce. By the way, Bruce, you sounded a lot more like Rick, accent-wise, in the 20 years ago Pro Wrestling Focus radio shows we put up for VIP members. You have lost your accent over the years, and I'm not sure that North Carolina and Greensboro appreciates that very much. I think you should stay true to
I'm not sure I appreciate you telling me that. So
hey, Rick, this is JJ. That's a great question that you asked. and the question obviously came up when the inductees were announced right from the get-go, and it was very controversial. But you have to understand that wrestling is still a business, and for those who have followed the industry know that for years there was tremendous bad blood between Vince McMahon and Ole Anderson on a personal level. And it goes back to when Ole owned stock in what was then Georgia Championship Wrestling, and Vince got to Jack and Jerry Briscoe, and by buying up their stock, he got controlling interest and was able to go in and take over the time slot. And that is, I think, the foundation of the bad blood that will always exist between Vince McMahon and Ole Anderson. And anybody that knows Ole, you don't ever have to wonder where you stand with him, because he's going to look you right in the eye and tell you. And I've known Ole. I started in the business in the Carolinas in 1971, and Ole had been there with Lars just before that, left, came back when I was there. So I've known Ole since 1971. Regard him as a friend to this day, someone who helped me when I started, and he's a great performer, drew money everywhere he ever went. And I'm often asked about the Four Horsemen, my favorite group. And Ole was part of the original, and if it hadn't been Ole in there, maybe there would never have been a Four Horsemen, and it never would have gone anywhere from there in the absence of an Ole. But Ole drew money no matter what. And he, image-wise, Flair, Arn, Tully, and I could kind of go with the wind a little bit, but the limousine riding, jet flying, kiss stealing, son of a gun, that wasn't Ole. And so it was easy, and we also took pages from real life. At that point, Ole's son was, I think, a senior in high school, and he was wrestling as an amateur and in state tournaments, and Ole wanted days off to go see his son wrestle. And so we turned that into a thing that, hey, Ole, what's more important, the Horseman or your brat kid? That was asking for a slap and a kisser, and Tully was the perfect one to say it. And when Ole let him have it, then I came out, tried to mend fences, and of course stuck up for the Horsemen. And at the end of the show, called Ole out, threatened to buy time to keep us on the air. And when Ole came back, all you got to do is apologize. You were wrong. Yeah, wham, let me have it, and a fight ensued. That's how we went off the air. So it moved Ole over to the other side, which gave us now a fresh opponent because Ole was the same no matter what side of the ring he was in, and always drew huge money. And as it happened, Luger became available, and what are we going to do with him? And he was really, really totally inexperienced. But we were far enough along that we could camouflage that inexperience with Luger. And then when Barry came along, that was a total surprise that nobody saw coming. And I think from bell to bell, that was the best group in terms of in-ring product on any given night. But to answer your question about selection for the Hall of Fame, if you know the history between Vince and Ole, there's no way that it was ever going to be Ole. And if Vince, for some reason, had said okay to Ole would have told him still stick it where the sun doesn't shine and wouldn't have accepted the honor anyway. So that wasn't going to happen.
JJ, is that the difference with Ole and some of the others who Vince has had grudges with and forgiven, is that it's got to be a two-way street? And you kind of said at the end there, I think Vince knows Ole would say stick it, where a lot of other people who Vince had problems with.
You look at Bret Hart. I mean, if you were taken on, or my own situation of being chosen for induction, if you've read my story and know how I left there, the odds that and again, you pointed out earlier that, that I've been on Roundtable and some other things, but each time I've gone back, I've dealt with a TV producer or what have you and had absolutely no interaction personally with Vince until the actual Hall of Fame ceremony. And I was not only surprised but shocked that I to this day can't explain how it happened. And going to Miami, I had no idea if I was going to be given a chilly reception. And as it ended up, my children were all there. It was it was everything that I ever could have hoped it could be, and then some in terms of how I was treated. The whole McMahon family were gracious. But you look at Vince with Bret Hart. Bret Hart, when the thing happened in Montreal, Vince came down to ringside. Bret spit in his face in front of everybody in that arena when they got backstage, punched him, and the camera picked it up. So if you were a betting man as to the odds of them ever doing business again, I think would have been astronomical. But Vince is always one that if he sees dollars that could be made, and in this case, you said it has to be a two-way street. Bret knew that, like the Ultimate Warrior, they had the rights to the footage. They could tell the Bret Hart story any way that they wanted to, and Bret has a lot of pride of being a renowned athlete from Canada, and he didn't want that story told without some input. So it gave them a reason to get back and to discuss things, and that even spills over to a degree to the situation with Bruno Sammartino. But to answer Rick's question, it was never going to happen with Ole. And Barry was the son of Blackjack Mulligan, who was already in with Lanza in the Hall of Fame. Barry had worked there as an agent for a while. So in terms of politically, it was understandable that Barry was the version that was picked. And knowing all of that, I had no problem with it. And Vince used to talk about, well, if you had a magic wand. If I had a magic wand, yes, it would have been beautiful if somehow Ole could have been given the recognition, that Luger could have been there and been sitting in the audience and recognized. But life is not that simple. And to go there in front of 14, 15, whatever thousand people there were in American Airlines Arena the night before, at that point broke the record for a Hall of Fame induction. And I think we meant something because they included us on the edited down version that following Monday. Yeah. And then the next day you walk out and they're introduced in front of 70-some thousand people, whatever the number was, at another event that set the record for live events until it was broken again this year. And I hadn't been to an event in 16 years. And when I got down there and saw where the WWE brand had gone in those 16 years, I always say you cannot argue with success. And I didn't agree with every promoter that I ever worked with throughout my whole career because that's the nature of the business. And Vince has done a lot of things that I didn't agree with, even found offensive. But you can't argue with the brand that he's built and the success that goes with it.
Rick, I appreciate the call. Good to hear from you. Call again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
You bet. All right, let's go to 240 next. I've been patiently holding for a very long time. 240, please state your name.
Hey, Rick, I didn't tell Rick, but coming up in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be at FanFest in Charlotte, and Burlington's not that far away. Greg Price is missed last year, but he's bringing back a lot of greats. And Ole, speaking of all things, just added Ole, which put the icing on the cake for me. I'm excited to go back and to see Ole, and also Baron von Raschke is going to be there, and he was recently inducted in the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in the class of 2013, which included me. So it'll be great to see Raschke there as well too, and also the assassin Jody Hamilton is going to be there. So Rick, come on down to Charlotte that first week of August and come up and say hello.
Awesome.
So go ahead. You got another caller. Let's go.
Yep, we sure do. 240. Please state your name and where you're from.
This is Ryan from Cumberland.
Hey, Ryan.
I'd like to talk about the battle royals JJ did back in the 80s with the managers. Any memories and anyone that was a weak link in the battle royal?
Oh boy, Ryan, they just released the WWE just released the tape, which was the best of the War Games, and of course I was in the very first War Game, which was on the 4th of July at the Omni in Atlanta, and it was the most devastating injury that I suffered throughout my entire life. Most people think of me as the leader of the Four Horsemen and don't know that I actually had 3,200 some wrestling matches throughout my career, and
3,200.
It was brutal. It was brutal, and I think the brutality of that first one in the Omni set the tone that maybe helped all the others be successful. So my memories of the battle royals and the War Games. The battle royals sometimes could be a fun thing, but the War Games wasn't much fun about that. They were brutal.
Very good. Bruce, you want to jump back into the fray here?
Yeah, I mean, JJ talked about working with Vince McMahon, and you had the job that Jane Geddes has now, that Jim Ross had, that John Laurinaitis had, talent relations, where you're dealing with paying wrestlers, where you're deciding who gets what pay based on splitting that out, and all kinds of personnel issues, and including what's called health and wellness now, the drug policy. What advice would you give to Jane Geddes, the person that's in that job now? What does it take to do that job and be successful, particularly working with Vince McMahon?
Well, it's a thankless position, and I don't know that I could give her any advice. I can only relate to my own situation, and the reason I think that I was able to stay there 7 going on 8 years was because I started as a fan. I was a referee for 8 years. I started, doing enhancement matches on TV, getting beat up by the stars, and worked my way up the ladder. And to have success in the wrestling business, you got to love it. You got to have tremendous desire. You have to have some talent. But the other two things are you need a lot of help from a lot of people on the way, which I had. And the other thing you need often is luck, just to happen to be in the right place at the right time when opportunity presents itself, and the Horseman is a great example of that. So by the time I got where I was retired from the ring and in that position, I think what helped me have longevity was the people that I was dealing with. Every time that I would talk to them or deal with them on any issue, and sometimes, you're the bearer of the bad news, I walked a mile in their shoes. So I always said to myself, if I was in their shoes, how would I want the news presented to me? And it was back in the day when contracts were they had a 90-day get out clause where they weren't renewed. And a lawyer used to write up a letter in legalese that's very cold and very formal, and put it in a FedEx envelope and mail it to a guy's home. and guys would open it up, and I changed the policy when I was there to say that no letter goes out until I'm told about it, and I make a personal phone call in advance and talk to the guy, and at least give him the courtesy of saying, look, and tell him, this isn't good news, but I want you to have a heads up so that you're not home and the envelope doesn't come and your wife opens it and reads the letter and it's devastating news. And again, because I walked a mile in their shoes. And I think guys in that position, your thing is not being everybody's friend, because that's not going to happen, the nature of the position. But if you treat guys with respect, and I always try to treat them as if I had wanted to be treated if I was in their shoes, and most of the guys got it and respected you for respecting them. So in terms of Jane working for Vince, man, I don't know. She didn't have the benefit of what I had and what Pat Patterson had and what Jim Ross had, and I guess to a degree John Laurinaitis too. So it's just tough to work with, very demanding to start with. And when you're dealing with talent, it's nice if they know that you could relate to them on a personal level because you've been where they are at some point in your career.
As far as Vince McMahon, what is Vince McMahon looking for, or what Vince McMahon works, it said 24 hours a day or 7 days a week in his prime. Dealing with him, what are the things that he wants, and what are the things you want to stay away from as far as working with him close by?
Well, I think I stated in my book that Vince used to say, I want the truth. I want you to tell me how you feel. And at the same time that Vince would say that, he would also make it very difficult for you to be brutally honest with him, because he can be very intimidating.
Yeah.
And so the greater majority of guys that are there will start to say how they really feel until they're challenged. And if they're guys who aren't independently wealthy, that have families, that value that job, sometimes then put on the brakes and go into reverse mode. And there was only a couple guys in my experience there that I thought were in a position to be brutally honest with Vince and never back down and tell him exactly what they did think, whether Vince argued with him or not. And one guy was Pat Patterson, and the other guy's name is Gerald Briscoe. And
so
those
the
two guys
stood up.
told him like it was, and if Vince had said, pack your bags and hit the road, they wouldn't have had a benefit for either of them. And I have great respect for Pat Patterson. He was a genius in the business, and I learned a lot from him. And I have that same respect for Gerald Briscoe on all levels, including a performer. He was a great talent in his own right. He was a great tag team combination with his brother Jack, and I think Gerald is worthy of being recognized as a Hall of Famer as an individual, not just because he's Jack's brother.
Yeah, he really had a great run here in this area in the Mid-Atlantic. We're talking about the Mid-Atlantic Fan Fest, August 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. But
yeah, Gerald is going to be there, and I'm excited about that too. When I started in the business, Gerald was on top. He was an established tag team with Thunderbolt Patterson.
And he could really work. He could really talk. He was a quintessential good guy. You talked about how gratifying it is to see the cycle turn back, and that Paul Heyman is now an effective manager after a lot of us thought that maybe we wouldn't see managers again. And
Dutch Mantel too.
And Dutch Mantel, absolutely.
And Zed, whatever his name is, and again, if the scenario is right, he's a great mind in the business, a great talker, and a great manager. So again, he's a second example of if the circumstances are right in the modern industry. But there are two old timers who cut their teeth a long time ago and understand what that role is and can do it extremely well.
What do you see the role of a manager? All the years that you were a manager, what did you feel like the J.J. Dillon character should be doing, or playing support to the biggest stars, to the biggest bad guys in the business? How do you see the role of a manager? Because I thought you were I watched you very close by in the Greensboro Coliseum every month and in Dorton Arena and places in the Carolinas, and I thought you were great at all the little subtleties of looking concerned for your guy and picking the right time to act and then staying out of it at the right time. But how did you see the role of managers, and who did you learn from when you made that transition from being a main event wrestler to becoming a manager?
And JJ, I'll insert before you answer that, whenever I think of you, you always look distressed. You're always rubbing your forehead looking distressed.
Look concerned, yeah.
If you had my schedule, my life, you'd be distressed. But no, my philosophy was always less is more. And I think part of that goes back to the fact that I had so many wrestling matches under my belt that if push came to shove, a lot of smaller territories. I think there were managers that were there who didn't have extensive wrestling backgrounds who thought, Jesus, times get tough. And all of a sudden the promoter says, I've got to look at this roster and I got to cut a little bit. Where would be the first place that they would look? Because you need two wrestlers to have a match, and you need a referee for the third man in the ring, and the one who is expendable in really, really tough times would be the manager. So I think a lot of managers had the mindset of wanting to put the focus of attention on themselves to kind of show that, I am valuable and they really do need me. And I don't know if it was because in the back of my mind that I thought, my situation is different. I don't have to go out and prove anything on any given night. So I can take the attitude of less is more. The other thing is, as Bruce pointed out, that I'm sitting there at a chair at ringside, and I'm watching my guy. And there's people sitting not that far away from me that are paying a good price to sit in the front row of ringside. And if I don't feel pain when my guy is in a situation where he's not doing too well, or if he does something that's turned the tide, I'm going to jump up and rejoice until all of a sudden it immediately turns around and I sit back down like it didn't happen. In other words, how can I expect the person sitting in the front row that bought a ticket to be into the emotion of the match if me as the manager in the corner don't show that I have that same degree of emotion watching the match? So, yes, there were subtleties, and they carried over to interviews. One of the interviews I'm most proud of, I never said a word. I was standing behind Lex Luger.
I love that interview. I love that interview. I'm just
you know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do. I have it to this day.
If you read my facial expressions, I don't have to say a word. It is, I made it known just by my demeanor, by the little subtleties, that I'm having a problem with the things that Luger is saying. And if you're watching, hopefully that's conveyed to you that there's trouble here. This guy is talking, and the guy right over his shoulder is not saying a word, but you can tell he's not happy. And I think that's an important part of the total picture. And I took great pride in the fact that those were the things that I concentrated on. And it's like Bruce said, that sometimes I would throw a piece of paper, on the corner, and Mr. Referee, excuse me, there's somebody who's throwing some trash in the ring, and I'd get up and knock it off the floor and sit back down. And you can get up a couple of times during the match, and the fans draw their attention to you, expecting you to do something till they see that you're not going to do anything. And then when they least expect it, you do something of impact that maybe turns the tide of the match, and now they're very upset with you. So that is where I'm going when I say less is more, and that was always my philosophy.
Yeah, I think, JJ, that you showed there's more ways to be a manager than the ones that get a lot of attention, and it's in zero disrespect and lack of acclaim to the great, more flamboyant, outlandish managers, Bobby Heenan, Jim Cornette, Paul Heyman. There's so many ways that they're excellent at what they do. You did it in a less flashy way, but I think you did a nice job explaining why you were very valuable by being different.
Yeah.
And I
would be the first one to say Bobby Heenan's the greatest manager in the history of the business. And he set the standard by which all the rest of us were judged.
Yeah.
My style was a little bit more like a Gary Hart. Gary Hart,
yes, yeah.
Was one that was not flamboyant either. And Gary never gets his due because he never had a chance to be on the grand stage and get the exposure. So there's no formula that this is what you have to do to be a successful manager. And I always tried to dress the part and was perceived as someone who was a business manager as much as anything, that handled the details and did what they thought the role of a manager was, not just to be someone who is an antagonist at ringside.
Bruce, if you don't mind, we got a couple more calls. Do you mind if we take a couple more calls?
Yeah, let me say this. J.J. Dillon's book at jjdillon.com, Wrestlers Are Like Seagulls, it gets my highest recommendation. No, you can go.
So thank you very much. I'm very proud of it. There was Scott Teal took my life story. We worked on it for a year. He told it in a wonderful way that makes for a good read. The original print was just a little over 3,000 copies. It was not sold in books, so you had to do a little work to find it. Maybe still, in some ways, the best kept secret, and I think right now there's only maybe 300-400 copies left, all of which I've offered to. It started as a project the first year that when people ordered it through the website, I signed them and personalized them if they wanted to, as my way of saying thank you for going to the trouble to find us and get a copy. And I've just continued since the book was published in 2005. And for a while it's been available on Amazon, which obviously I couldn't sign those copies unless somebody brought it to me at an appearance or something. But very proud of how the book turned out because I think it was very objective. I wrote it when I was out of the business. I had no axe to grind with anybody. And even talking about Vince McMahon, I think if you look at it, I probably have more of a positive spin on my experiences with Vince McMahon than maybe some negative feelings that I may have had on the day I walked out the door. So, and I try it also with everybody that I work with to be objective. And if you're going to do that, then you have to be willing to look in the mirror and be objective about yourself, too, about where you feel your strengths are and where your shortcomings are. And I like to feel that I did that as well.
Excellent. We'll go to patient caller 704. You are on the show. Please state your name and where you're from.
Hey, this is Jeremy from Charlotte. Or as I like to tell a lot of people, like Nate used to say, the big side of town, as he said so many times. But JJ, I just want to say thank you, especially you and all the Horsemen, because I have such great memories from, watching TBS as a kid. And, those are memories. I've lost my great-grandfather, and that was one of his things with me. We would always watch Braves baseball and you guys on TBS. And, it was great memories. But a couple questions.
Well, I thank you for those kind words. If you're in Charlotte, I hope you come down to the Hilton that first weekend of August. And like I say, the great news that was just released is that Ole, who has MS and has had a very, very tough time of it, and it was a big question as to whether he would even be physically able to make the trip from his home down outside of Atlanta to even come there. And he's going to be there. And for me, that's the highlight. And I'm as excited to be there as any of the fans that are looking forward to come to Fan Fest this year.
Well, yeah, I at great risk to my own personal self because I'm getting married soon. I told my fiance I was going to buy a VIP ticket this year, so I'm really excited about coming up to University City and going to that. So anyway,
please come up and introduce yourself and tell them that we spoke briefly on this program. And one of the nice things is all those years where you talk about having lost your grandfather. Back in those days, we in the business were isolated from the fans. We would come in the back door, leave the back door, and unless we happen to stop at a convenience store where you happen to be stopping, chances are we would never meet and never get a chance to even begin to know each other. And the Fan Fest is a 3-4 day thing, so there's plenty of opportunities, not only for autographs and pictures and get old memorabilia that's been saved, signed, but it's a chance to interact, and I always take every opportunity in every interview to thank the fans, because there would have never been professional wrestling or Four Horsemen or J.J. Dillon if it wasn't for the fans, and I'm not too proud to thank the fans for their loyal support for
well, you know,
all the years.
I'll tell you this, when I used to come to Charlotte, I would, every year when the new phone book would come out, I would look up you guys' names in the phone book, hoping every year, I just hoped that you guys would have your number in the phone book, and it never happened. But anyway, you know, there towards after the Hornets came along, and of course, you know, the Four Horsemen guys, you know, across the nation, that was the first home team for Charlotte, North Carolina, was the Four Horsemen. There were two different buildings. There was the old Independence Arena out on Independence, and then there was the new Charlotte Coliseum in Paola. There was always a rumor growing up that, you know, supposedly WWE had kept WCW back in the early 90s, you know, late 80s when the building first opened, that they had kept you guys from running the new Coliseum. That's why all your shows were at the Big Eye, as it was called. Is that true?
Well, from having worked on the other side, I can tell you I forget what the actual term is, but it's called proprietary renter. And as an example, in the major arenas, let's say Madison Square Garden, if the WWF goes in there, there are laws that says you can't have exclusivity to something and keep someone else out. But if you run with regularity, like Madison Square Garden, it's reasonable and prudent to say that your agreement with Madison Square Garden is that a competing event in the same industry can't come in 4 weeks before your event or 4 weeks after your event. And most sports would say that's reasonable. And so if you ran every third week, you legally keep the other person out of the arena, and I think that's what you're talking about. And it was someone who was very clever in routing of arenas to make sure that your competition couldn't get in the bigger arenas in some towns.
Yeah, and that was one thing, because, you know, we always, you know, Independence was kind of wore out, and it was old, and it was, you know, I'm sure you guys can tell stories.
Oh, absolutely. And when I broke into business, we were at Park Center, which was even smaller in downtown. I think it's now part of the college or something. But you know, those are just great memories
Grady
for
Control
me.
Center.
Yes.
My second question is the Greenville promo by Flair, when you guys reformed. How much of that got approved by Bischoff before he went on the air? When you guys reformed,
when you go on live TV sometimes, and Flair, the feelings with Flair and Bischoff went much deeper than my feelings with Bischoff. And when Rick got out there, and when you can see the outpouring of love and affection and admiration from those fans, and the atmosphere in the arena that night, that just lit a fire under Eric to basically allow Rick to tell Eric Bischoff what he really thought of him. And I don't think Eric Bischoff certainly didn't approve what he was going to say, didn't know what he was going to say, and didn't have much control over it.
Very cool. Jeremy, I put you on hold just because we're getting some feedback. Let me bring you back on, and you can follow up, or just we'll say goodbye to you. Jeremy.
All right. Got me, Wade?
Yeah, we got you back. I just had to put you on hold.
Okay, cool.
Some feedback.
Sorry. Yeah, it's about to storm in this part of North Carolina too. So, that was a great moment in Horseman history, of course. I mean, even if Mongo McMichael was in the ring, but the Charlotte area still loves you guys, as you know, and we appreciate all you did, and can't wait to see you in a couple weeks.
Well, we love coming back to Charlotte, and I'm inducting my old friend Les Thatcher into the Hall of Heroes, and I get to see the Cornet and the Midnight Express and the Rock and Roll Express, and some friends that, where else as someone in the business can you go on a weekend and see so many of the guys that, and it's the same thing with Cauliflower Alley Club when I go out to Vegas every year, and I'm also involved with the Professional Wrestling Hall of Fame up in Amsterdam, New York, and I go up since 2006 every year for their induction weekend. So each one is an opportunity for me to see guys that I wouldn't see otherwise, and the Fan Fest is certainly on a grand scale.
All right, very good. J.J. Dillon has been our guest. It has been an absolute pleasure, J.J., here on the Livecast, hearing you tell your stories and share your experiences. The time flew by. I say that with a lot of our guests, and you're no exception. I can't believe we've been on for an hour and a half. I don't know if I should have even told you that because maybe the time flew for you too. But we appreciate all the time you've given us.
That's right. I've enjoyed it. You guys have asked some great questions, and I've always enjoyed the days with the Torch right from the early days. And of course, I recently commented to Bruce about him sitting in the front row of ringside at Greensboro. So I've known him for a long time as well, and I've enjoyed this as much as anybody. Awesome.
And I got to watch you from the front row also at the old Met Sports Center in Bloomington, Minnesota, when the NWA finally started coming to town with Ric Flair against Dusty Rhodes or Ric Flair against Barry Windham on top, and you often worked on the undercard in a full body suit, and usually lost, JJ, I must say.
I have all my matches logged, and I kind of have lost track of my one-loss record. Precious Paul Ellering was a regular opponent, and I didn't have much luck with him for some reason. I guess he's just very talented, and being around those tough Road Warriors for too long made him tough too.
Don't forget, visit PWTorch.com every day, including the Ask PWTorch feature and many other news features and exclusive features, and download our app. Just search PWTorch in the App Store on your iPhone or Android device or any other smart device, actually, including Samsung smart TVs and DVD players. On behalf of Bruce Mitchell, Wade Keller, thanking J.J. Dillon, and we're signing off on the Livecast.